Now we're going to switch up the pace and have a keynote session with Lorenzo Chiavarini, Head of Research at dealroom.co. Lorenzo is going to tell us about the state of energy tech financing in Europe. Welcome, Lorenzo. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just super quickly, D-Room is a data platform on the world of startup, venture capital, and tech ecosystem. So my role is doing analysis, bring transparency to our VC, corporate, and government clients about what's happening in the startup market, and help them navigate this sector. And in particular, yeah, we put together a few trends about the energy tech sector for the conference. So yeah, just a bit of an intro that's more broadly not just about startups. Of course, like we all see that the narrative has quickly changed. To a few years back, it's all about decarbonization. Now it's energy security is top of mind, which in the case of Europe, they really align, like in the sense that we don't have fossil fuels. There's like, it is perfect alignment between decarbonizing and securing the energy supply. And we have seen stuff changing quickly. The Baltics cut off from Russia after 70 years, whatever. The cities are ditching gas. Things are changing quickly, and we're seeing this trickle down to the startup market. And of course, startups have changed their pitching to investors. Like we did a quick analysis of what they were saying in the press releases or pitches back in 2-3 years ago, and it was all, emission, clean, renewable, transition, decarbonization, and now the same stuff are still there, but there's all like security and resilience and cost and price and so on, which makes sense. The solution are still the same. Renewables, nuclear, geothermal, whatever, hydrogen, green molecules, batteries, but it's just that we are now many of these has gotten to price competitiveness and everything, so we are stressing the benefit and not just the fact that, decarbonizing, which is still something we should keep the attention on. And Europe has achieved a lot, which is not often given the right credit to. Like in 2022, a crazy amount of money was spent in fossil fuel imports due to the crisis, 600 billion. This is all lost from the European continent. And these are already changed a lot, like the gas consumption is down 20%, and there was this year an estimated 45 billion in saved energy costs because of the energy transition in Europe. And this is projected to increase to 260 billion in a few years. But we still have really high energy prices due to the fact that fossil fuels are not really part of the energy mix in Europe domestically. And fortunately, renewables are ramping up, and so things are changing, but we still need to see that trickle down to energy prices because of how the market works. And we should not forget that Europe is the fastest growing continent on the planet, and plus 2.3 degrees in 2024. So it's good that we are decarbonizing and everything is aligning on this sector. Still, China is definitely winning the race. This is a pretty staggering analysis that was run by Bloomberg, and China is spending 4.5% of their GDP on the energy transition, which is more than double the global average. While Europe, despite the fact that we are really positioned to be doing this the same way as China was doing, probably, we haven't really. We are still around the global average, so we are not really pushing more than what we could have. Yet the US, of course, is in another league because they focus more on defense. They have a lot of fossil fuels, so still they do a lot of innovation, but they're not positioned to lead the clean energy transition like we have been seeing. And of course, China is just winning on every battlefield, from the research side to producing stuff, deploying them, and the consumption is on this way to become, I think, the first real electrostate. And we gave up solar more than a decade ago. We didn't try to win on batteries so far. Electric vehicles, we are behind. So there's a lot that startups need to figure out, and we need to really push this ecosystem. Now we get to the real data after the narrative. So if we look at what's been happening on the lens of VC funding, Europe really had a phase of ramp up when in 2023 even surpassed the US in terms of total amounting in energy financing. In the last 2 years, this has been decreasing. And despite everything that's happening politically in the US, actually energy tech has had a pretty good start of the year on the other side of the Atlantic, which over 50% of the global financing going to the US, a lot in nuclear, batteries, but a lot more. Looking at Europe, we had the peak like last year with over 15 billion. And what's like probably notable, most of the financing, of course, is around hardware. Not everything is deep tech. Some is more like established, but still, a lot of that has hardware and components. There's a bit of then, marketplaces SaaS enabled, which aids this transition. What's been happening that for sure most of the pain has been felt at the late stage. That's been dropping 60% from last year in volume sides, while the early and growth are pretty much around all-time high, so they're showing strong resilience. This is due to the lack of a really big financing like NOR voltage to green steel style things that we have not been seeing in the last year and a half. Well, there's still volume, like there were 19 100 million plus rounds. So, it's not that things are not happening, but there's a bit less money deploying at the later stage. And the investor scene has matured a lot in these years. There are like over 400 what we consider core climate tech investors globally that keep backing the sector consistently. And there were over 2,000 investors that did at least a deal in Europe in energy last year. So the ecosystem has grown a lot, and for startup, at least on the VC funding side, there's better to navigate. But what's been happening is that, of course, the segment it's going beyond venture capital, which is good, and I think has been the focus of a lot of discussion these days. So in last year, there was a record in the amount of not VC funding raised. So we're talking mostly about debt, project financing, and this kind of instruments, but also grants. And this was 18 billion, so almost double the VC funding raised. So we're seeing really, startup scale-ups getting creative with the kind of financing stack that they're tapping into. But this is of course very different from one sector to the other. Like what's more like, of course, debt, MP, project financing reliant is something like green molecules. That has been a focus on many panels here. You need to build a lot of plants. It's not fully novel tech. It's more like really deploying this plant. Some are first of a kind, some are not. And on the opposite side, of course, we find something like energy efficiency, where there's a lot of SaaS or asset light, so it's mostly VC funding reliant. Of course, this also differs by stage. So if we think about then who is financing this, beyond the equity side, on the grant side, it's mostly in Europe, public-related entity. But what's more interesting is on the debt side, there's a lot of mix of different kinds. There's, of course, a few public stuff like EIB, but there's also a lot of commercial banks, asset manager, insurances, infrastructure funds, and they all have slightly different risk appetites and stage. So it's really a bit hard, I think, for startups to navigate this sector. And this is where some VC are really adding value. I was today in an event about this climate brick on how to really finance this startup. And it's something that is a bit new to the sector to navigate. When we look at which segments have been growing the fastest in the last few years, there's, of course, green hydrogen, nuclear fusion, a few stuff around carbon tech. This is where, it's a bit the moving frontier in some ways. And Europe, it's leading in a few segments, like, smart, on the grid side, sustainable aviation, EV charging, where it's really trailing behind is around geothermal, nuclear, and other things. And China, like we said, is really a leader, but not in the sense of VC funding. There's really a strong state push is adopting different models. If we look at green molecules, we saw a record 1.3 billion being deployed in the sense of equity financing in the last year. Most of the activity has been going in electrolyzer, green hydrogen, and e-fuels. And particularly one sector that we did a lot of study on is the sustainable aviation side. In here, like it's one of the sector where Europe is really showing a lead in terms of startup being deployed. And in the last 3 years, activity has remained pretty substantial. We've seen funding across all decarbonization pathways from e-fuels, electric and hydrogen aircraft, but also route planning, contrail avoidance, and so on. For instance, we mapped over 200 startups globally. All the links to this stuff is going to be in a full report that you can scan at the end. Another sector where there's been a lot of activity recently in Europe is everything around the grid and flexibility management. I'm looking at this very broadly, like can be grid infrastructure, grid software, can also be stationary batteries, but also adoption in consumer of flexible assets. And also here, we map the sector across more than 15 categories. Where the most activity has been going is new suppliers that really integrate flexibility in the core of their offering, distributed energy resources adoption for consumers, but also like the grid sides on the hardware, both for battery storage and the infrastructure monitoring. Then, just to close with a few thoughts on a segment that no one is talking about, energy per AI. So yeah, everyone is predicting booming demand from AI, data center, blowing up the energy demand both in the US and in Europe. It could be very well be the case, but it's not inevitable. That's important. Like if we look at a decade of history of data centers, demand increased like 70 nets, but consumption didn't almost increase in the past. This was due to, of course, a lot of energy efficiency gains, and it's not inevitable that this is not going to happen again. And there are a few people that are starting to ring the bell and saying, maybe we are overbuilding just AI data center randomly. Both in China and the US, this narrative has started to emerge a bit from some industry leaders. So we will see, but it's not inevitable we need all these data centers. It's not inevitable that the energy consumption is going to rise so much. Still, it's important to, I think it doesn't really get to the narrative, but the data centers are not clean today, not at all. They just try to communicate they are. Of course, they are big buyer of power PPAs, but the grid in the top 3 locations for data center are everything far from being clean. Virginia, Beijing, and Oregon as an example. And we are not going to build nothing renewable or nuclear or whatever fast enough to just decarbonize everything we are building on that site. So we just, of course, one sector that is benefiting a lot from this rise of interest is nuclear. On both sides of the Atlantic, we are seeing activity being really strong. In 2025 already, in just a quarter, we are seeing really strong activity on both sides. We're talking mostly about small nuclear reactors, but also on the longer term about nuclear fusion. And this is going also in the narrative of security, resilience, and these kind of things. Where we really think the opportunity lies to decarbonize the sector is about reshaping computing itself, not just the energy supply to this. And so we did an analysis on what's like green computing startup that we call. In Europe, it's still an early stage scene with funding activity increasing, but most startups are really funded in the last few years, and it's a fast-growing sector. And we did a mapping and a white paper together with World Fund and Intel Ignite on this. So when I'm talking about green computing, I mean changes in semiconductor material, in GaN-SiC, but also manufacturing, chip design, in-memory computing, neuromorphic, this kind of stuff, quantum in the medium-long term, and also photonics for data center, interoptical connectors, and this kind of stuff, and of course the software side. So some of these solutions can really, save 50–80% singularly in energy consumption. So it's a matter of will we be able to scale them fast enough to match the current demand of AI and other things. On the other side, of course, AI can also accelerate sustainability strongly. So we are seeing an increase in attention in AI per climate tech startups. So application here can range a lot, but there's a lot in energy management of distributed energy supply and demand. There's, of course, in food and agri-tech, biodiversity monitoring, Earth observation, climate risk management. So there's really a lot of AI being applied for the climate and energy sector that can accelerate things. This doesn't mean that we don't need to decarbonize the AI energy consumption itself. I present a lot of stuff. There's a lot more that we put together. You can scan the report and have a read for free. There's double the pages here. There's link to all the resources live that you can explore. So you can see the mapping, you can see the startup, you can see what's happening to them. And then, I don't think I see the time running out, but I'm around if you want to ask me any question. I have a booth at the room. So just pop by if you have any question here or LinkedIn or whatever, and happy to have a discussion.